Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We're going to continue on with our examination of TurretinFan's response concerning Revelation 16:5 by Nick Sayers. And so I've written a book about Revelation 16:5, and TurretinFan is going through that book and he's critiquing it, which I'm glad for. I'm glad for any critique on the book. Of course, there are some places where I'm sort of left with my mouth open, saying, "Well, why can't you see the forest and the trees here?" It's quite basic sort of stuff. And but what I'm realizing is, as I'm going along, TurretinFan does seem to be picking up at least what I'm trying to relay onto other people. That this noun phrase, which art and was and shall be, is indeed a name. It is indeed the expansion of the name of Jehovah. And we can look at the other textual issues, which all line up with the Textus Receptus. If you got the critical text, none of this works. It's all over the place. Majority text, it's not working. And so this is quite an interesting litmus test. And so anyway, we're going through some of these things. Now, at the beginning of the last video, I said, well, TurretinFan pointed out sort of like a bit of a side issue, but it was something that I was harping on about, that James White back in 2014 had been shown conjectural emendations in a 28 text. Now, according to what I remember and how I processed everything, I didn't think that he actually admitted to those conjectures until 2019 and publicly rejected them then. But TurretinFan pointed out that in the very video that I was saying that he needed to watch, he did say that in 2014. So I was like, okay, well, eat humble pie. I've got something wrong. How does that detract from everything else I'm saying in the book? It doesn't really. It's sort of like a bit of a storm in a teacup with James White, but it was something that I was saying, and so I am eating humble pie with that. So most of this video actually deals with that. Now, I was going to skip through this because I'm like, well, okay, got that wrong. Let's move on to other stuff. But I thought, well, it's like, okay, I will go through everything, and I'll allow TurretinFan to talk about this. And so I'm going to go through it. Now, I really want to get to things like the Ethiopic and others. I'm pretty sure he goes through a little bit of Haimo's material. Perhaps that was the last video. But we're going to start just going through this. So let's begin. TurretinFan is here. Let's start this. I will fast forward a little bit.
Welcome, one and all, back to part 16 of this continued response to Nick Sayers regarding Revelation 16:5, his book on Beza's expansion of the rare nomen sacrum form of Jehovah and I Am in the final triadic declaration. This is a book that is devoted to an important question about the reading of one particular verse, but we have been pushing our way through the book, and hopefully we'll be reaching the end of chapter 13 soon, but not necessarily, or chapter 3 soon, but not necessarily in this episode. Subsection 13 and 14 is on the menu, which will leave 15 for the next time, partly because it's the most, one that has developed the most internet heat over it of all of these sections. But for today, Desiderius Erasmus, the evidence provided by Desiderius Erasmus, and then Miles Coverdale. Now, I want to acknowledge up front, although the way Nick had structured this seemed to suggest that these are talking about allusions of Beza's readings before Beza, that not all of them are intended that way, and sometimes they're just there to support some other aspect of Nick's argument, not necessarily that. So the short answer is neither in the case of Miles nor in the case of Erasmus are we dealing with the much coveted, what we would love to see, which would be a pre-Beza allusion to a Revelation 16:5 reading that conforms with Beza.
See, this is one of the things that with TurretinFan, I will go to the nth degree to explain something and show so many other people explaining it in a similar fashion. And then he's like, I just can't see it. Well, this is not an allusion to anything. This is just nothing. And it's like say Erasmus clearly in his Annotationis, in all 5 editions, he says, kai ho un, kai ho en, kai ho ekomenos. So he doesn't have esomenos, but he has ekomenos, and he has the ekomenos as a substitute for holy, which is big. So every, like, this is one of the things where James White said that no one had ever thought that it read differently. Okay, so I'm like, well, Erasmus in his annotations, he's saying this, and so where do you go with? How come you're saying that no one ever saw it differently, read it differently? And so we'll go through this information, but to me, this is important. It's dealing with the exact place. It's dealing with what Erasmus thinks. It's dealing with the issues that I bring up in my book. So what TurretinFan seems to have pushed back a little bit and saying, oh, Nick's saying I'm straw manning, etc. Well, you've got to understand what a straw man argument is. Okay, so just say TurretinFan wrote a book defending limited atonement. Okay, now I could go on about all types of aspects of Calvinism, Reform theology, and everything, but at the end of the day, his book is to do with limited atonement, and specifically that topic. Now, if I want to talk about God's eternal destiny for some people to go to heaven and some people to go to hell, if I want to talk about God actually creating and designing people, knowing that they were going to go to hell or knowing that they're going to go to heaven, I could talk about all that sort of stuff. But he might just say, yeah, well, that's another side topic. We're specifically dealing with this issue here. And so what I find is I'm not against TurretinFan going through a whole bunch of things that I haven't really mentioned. I'm fine with that. But you can't, at the end of it, say, well, what Nick's saying here, it's not true, it's not matching up. If you read what I'm saying, like I'll say, okay, here we have the future form of, shall be here in the Ethiopic text, or here in Beatus of Libana, or here in Hamo Halberstadensis. And he's like, well, it doesn't have Lord here. It doesn't have the whole triadic declaration there. Still has holy here. And he goes on about all this other stuff. And I'm like, okay, yeah, cool. You can point all that out. But at the end of the day, does it have the future form? That's what we're focusing on. And sometimes he's just like, he's got this tick list of 15 things he wants to tick off. He's like, see, it's not there, it's not here, this doesn't match up, And he's like, so we can't go with it. And it's like, if I was to go through, and I've mentioned this before, where it's John chapter 1, verse 18, where it says monogenes theos in the critical text, but the vast majority texts say monogenes weos, the only begotten Son or the only begotten God. Now, I could talk about many different aspects about John chapter 1, and specifically around verse 18. I could go through all the other aspects, but at the end of the day, does it say theos or weos? If you're going just through that, what I'm saying is this says the equivalent to esomenos, either in the Latin or in the Ethiopic, and he's just like, no, it doesn't. or his conclusion is, well, they mistranslated that, obviously. And it's like, what? They mistranslated it to match exactly what Beza said with the future form of esomenos and shall be in the King James. But so I'm sort of a little bit gobsmacked at some of the conclusions that are happening. So, but anyway, we'll continue through this video.
But Desiderius Erasmus is one that Nick has selected, and I'd love to get into it a little bit. Doki Doki says TF is a stream machine. No, I'm not a stream machine, but thank you very much. So, Nick, this is from Nick's book, page 137. He says, White claims there's not a question about it on anyone's part as to what the passage actually reads.
Okay, so I'm just going to, I usually do this beforehand, but I'm just going to quickly grab my book because I've got a draft copy in my email here. So 16.5. Let's have a look at that. This way you'll be able to know exactly where we're up to. Okay. And I've noticed that TurretinFan's got this little symbol here. I wonder if I actually inspired him a little bit. But when I saw this cover, I was like, yeah, that sort of explains the whole Revelation 16.5 thing. Specifically these pillars, because you sort of got, it looks like 3, but then you look on the other side, it's a cube. So you've got 6 sides, but then they're interconnected to other things. And it's like, there's a structure built. And so to me, Revelation 16.5 is built upon strong internal evidence, strong external evidence, and manuscript evidence as well, with Beza's manuscript, but also with the whole concept of holy. And then when you look down here, that looks like 3 sides going down, and it's quite amazing. Like it's just an amazing picture. It reminds me of M.C. Escher and his artwork, which is really quite mind-boggling when you look into it. And I think there's certain aspects of the Godhead and certain aspects of God which are like that. You start scratching the surface. If you were just to do a study on the blood of Jesus, you would end up with a multifaceted, multi-layered concept that you could just keep digging forever and ever to eternity. And so I felt that picture sort of summed it all up. I've got some really bad spelling errors in this. Okay, so where are we? We're down to Erasmus. And so if you followed through, I mean, you know, some of these ones which are so basic, I mean, here we have et futuris est, which means and is to come. And basically TurretinFan's saying it's not the reading of Beza. It's like, well, okay. Hamo, it's not the reading of Beza. Et eris is the reading of Beza, but apparently because of other things, it's not. It's quite amazing. Even just when you read this, you know, in past times, it is used here 3 times. That is the past, the present, and the future, who were holy are and shall be just. And so there's quite a lot in what I'm saying here, but I just find that TurretinFan's just skimming over this, or not so much skimming, but he's reading it and he's just going, okay, well, how can I find a way to get out of this? So it's a bit like being it's to me, this is cognitive dissonance. When you're shown evidence for something, it's right in front of your face. I mean, he would be better off just saying, yeah, this is evidence, but it's not strong enough for me, Nick. I'm sorry. You know, yes, this does have the reading, because anyone who's looked at this, like say Hoskier knew his stuff, okay, collating manuscripts and all the rest of it. And he read through this and said, yeah, it's in Beatus of Libana. Yes, it's in the Ethiopic, and yes, it's in this, and so he was pointing out exactly the same things I'm pointing out. But TurretinFan's fighting against what I'm saying. So he's not just fighting against me with this, he's fighting against Hoskier. Like, it's like, well, and see, the thing is, when I first did the first draft of the book, I had 6 or 7 quotations. It's like, wow, they're allusions directly to Revelation 16:5, and then I'd get some that were allusions to Jehovah or I am expanded and other things. And so I was like, well, I want to include them as well, just to sort of prove my point about Jehovah being, and the early church writers knowing about this and what the name meant. And so I put those things in there. But unfortunately, TurretinFan's gone through almost all of these quotations with the mindset, no, Nick is showing the whole triadic declaration here. And it's like, and so clearly I pointed out in a footnote that some allude to Revelation 16:5, some allude to Jehovah and I Am, and some allude to both. So he's gone through going, see, this doesn't allude to Revelation 16:5. It's like, well, that one alludes to Jehovah, which might inadvertently allude to Revelation 16:5. You know what I mean? And so it's because I'm bringing up many different facets and many different arguments. So I'm saying, okay, here's evidence. And like I said the other day, I was like, okay, well, I'm sure since 2019, there has been some other stuff put on to the internet about the Triadic Declaration. And so sure enough, I just went surfing through and found a whole bunch of other information. Now, I only had time to put one up. But if we go to my website here, so this is my Textus Receptus website. Now, where was it? It was Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so let's look at this one. Let's go a little bit bigger. And so he has that when he says, and on account of this, from the eloquences, he infers a conclusion from the things said. And he says that on account of this, that God is the principle of all things. In sacred scripture, God himself, who truly pre-exists all things, is praised in many ways according to every ratio of existing things. For there is said of him what was and is and shall be, through which there is understood what has been made, that is, the past, and what is made, that is, the present, and what shall be made, that is, the future. So it's very, what how would you say that's? Would you just say that's relevant to the nature of God, or to the name of God, or to Revelation 16:5? It's basically saying the same thing. So with this issue, would you put that into, it's got et futuris est, which many people like to say, if we just go back a little bit, we see Hamo, or he has et eris. Beatus of Libana has et futuris est here. Okay. So it's got those exact words, it shall be. So whether that is talking about the nature of God, or talking about the name of God, or whether this is saying in sacred scripture it's revealed and it's talking about Revelation 16:5, I guess we'd have to read more of the context and everything. But it's like, well, there's another one. So what do you want me to do with that? And so when I was writing the book, I was like, well, I'll just put it in there so people can have all the evidence. Okay, so that's another one I found on a Thomas Aquinas website. So someone's gone through and put translations of that up and originals in the Latin. And so the thing is, TurretinFan's going through this and going, well, that doesn't read exactly the way that Beza has it. Beza has, et eris up here, et eris. So it's not exactly the same. It's got futurus s, and it's like they mean the same thing. It doesn't, where's Lord here? Where's Revelation 16:5 here? But it's like, all I'm doing is just putting the evidence there. Now, there are 3 or 4 very strong evidences for Revelation 16:5, particularly where it's in the commentary of Beatus of Libana, Hamo Halberstadensis, the Ethiopic, and I can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but it's like we're looking at evidences which are talking specifically about Revelation 16:5, and it's got the future form there. Okay. And so, the shall be in the eris in Hamo. So to me, they're very strong evidences, and it's like why wouldn't TurretinFan just admit that it's there? He's just wanting to dismiss everything. I mean, it's almost like I mean, I guess if someone was coming to me and saying, well, ghosts are real, the house across the road is haunted, here's a photo of a ghost, and it's like I'm holding it up going, no, I don't see that, I don't see that. But if there was a photo of something there, it's like, well, yeah, that looks like a ghost, but and I would admit, yes, but that's not strong enough evidence for me to believe it. But TurretinFan's going, no, I can't see it still. And it's like, even if it's faked or whatever, or it's read into it or whatever, you still got to admit that it has the future form. And so that this has become sort of a little bit annoying, or quite a bit annoying. So, but that's fine. He's entitled to his opinion. But I'll just keep going through this. So we're looking at Desiderius Erasmus. So what he just read was, I wrote, White claimed, there is not a question about it on anyone's part as to what that passage actually reads. So what I was doing, I was clearly pointing out what James White in his book was making these statements and making these claims. And I'm like, well, okay, let's look into this claim. Well, then it's like, well, why did Erasmus question it? So most of these critical text guys, you start talking about the Textus Receptus, they just go straight back to Erasmus. They forget Beza, they forget Stephanus, they forget the King James translators. Let's just go back to Erasmus, because that's where they want to muddy the waters, and because the Reformation hadn't really kicked off. There were a lot of people disgruntled with the Roman Catholic Church. There were even popes who were disgruntled with the church. But so what you find is this type of turmoil, and then you find a huge split. So before the massive split, it's like, well, what side were people on? And so you can blur those lines and go, well, he was just, a faithful Roman Catholic. And it's like, well, yes, in some aspects he was, but in other aspects, it was like he was very, very critical of the church. He was critical of a lot of things in the church. Yes, there were some things which I wouldn't agree with. And it's like with Martin Luther. I mean, he said some really, really good things. And I would agree, just say out of 20 things, I'd agree with like 3 or 4 of them. A lot of other stuff, I'm like, nah, don't agree with that, don't agree with it. And when I read Erasmus, I'm sort of the same. But he was on one side of the fence and Luther was on the other. But Luther got booted out. Erasmus didn't. Had Erasmus just been booted out, it would be like, oh, he's a reformer now, And Tyndale didn't get booted out until the moment they strangled him and then burnt him. He was still a Roman Catholic priest, and he was basically the guiding force behind the Reformation in England. And a lot of that was due to transcribing Erasmus's work into English. And people read it and went, let's get rid of the Roman Catholic Church. Let's have a new church. You know what I mean? And so, Erasmus's character and everything is multifaceted. You can't just put him, pigeonhole him in a certain thing, or relate him to Roman Catholics today. The whole Roman Catholic system has absolutely changed. You don't get the Spanish Inquisition knocking on your door. So Docky's in the house saying, hey, Nick. Nick is also a stream machine. I wish I was. I hardly get much time nowadays to do streams. But when I do them, I tend to do them massively long because I don't get the opportunities much. But let's go through TurretinFan's material.
So that might be an overstatement of rhetorical overstatement, just an overstatement. And obviously there's some question. King James advocates bring up a question, and other people have raised questions over the years. However, within the attempts to reconstruct the text from the manuscripts we have, there's a very small question about this particular text. Maybe 2 points which would be of interest. One is whether there should be a chi, an and, before the Holy One, such that it would be righteous you are, who was and who is and was, and holy, so that the is and was are kind of in a parentheses, and it's righteous and holy. or whether you should not have that and. That's one. And then also whether or not this word Lord should be inserted. Although the weight of the evidence against Lord being inserted here is quite strong, I don't think there's a big question about that. And even the question about adding the and, I think that it's not a particularly contested point, but I don't know if that's what Nick is getting at here. Nick actually has a stronger, I think, than that, stronger point to raise. And that is, what about the people who have just questioned this reading altogether? So he quotes a portion of Erasmus, his annotations at Revelation 16:5, and I will come to those in a minute. He has provided an interesting version of these comments, which don't quite align with what I have, but they're quite similar. I'm not sure why they don't quite align, but whatever the reason might be, they seem to have the same, essentially the same. That as we go.
Sorry, my internet is cutting out a little bit there. Sorry about that. Okay. So I'm just going to turn something off. Adobe Creative Cloud running in the background, doing some sort of update, sucking all my bandwidth. Okay, so I'll just get TurretinFan back. I'll rewind him back a little bit.
It's interesting. They seem to have the same, essentially the same words. So we'll deal with that as we go. It's interesting, fascinating that we don't have exactly the same words, and we seem to be working from the same edition. Anyway, he says in Erasmus's 1530, maybe he's quoting somebody who's quoting a different edition, or I've got the wrong edition myself. I don't know. Doesn't matter because it won't affect our outcome. He says in his 1535 annotations, he says that he proposes, well, here's the translation that Nick provides. He says, thou who art and who wast, I don't know why you'd put a the in the translation of Latin at all. But anyway, he does that. Then he says, although interpreter changed from, however, to harmonize with the list mentioned above, who is, who was, who is to come, ho on, ho en, ho erkomenos.
Okay, so it must be noted that at the beginning of the book, we're on page 139. Now I'll just actually open that up in a new tab, just so I don't create confusion. At the beginning of the book, I did mention, let's find this. Okay. Or can we find something there? Here we go. No. Google is not really that user-friendly. Okay, let's try that search again. Find. Here we go. Latin. All right. Oh, I don't know why it started there. Okay. How are we going backwards through the document? That's not really helpful. Here we go. Okay, look at this. Some of the Latin in this article needs refinement, and any fluent volunteers are welcome to translate. So I do have a caveat for the bad Latin. Now, Google Translate, going through and trying to figure out what these words mean in Latin, when you're going through stuff and you're pioneering a work, sometimes I would only just have some printed book back in 1820, and I'm just copying something from that and trying to reference that, and something in Google Books and blurry photos, and I'd have to run that through Translate. So obviously here, when you go through, I've left the poor translation so that people can see. Perhaps I should have had a little asterisk and reminded people that I did say that. But I guess as I'm going through, I would expect that at the end of the introduction, some of the Latin in this article needs refinement. People would go, oh, okay, so that's what's happened. It's not like I have access to, all the libraries of Europe, and I pay $1,000 a year to have the Bodleian collection at my fingertips. I'm just going through, just Googling, and so any fluent volunteers are welcome to translate. And so that, like, you look at just the issue of translating the annotations of Theodore Beza was a game changer in people rediscovering the knowledge that Beza had of ancient manuscript. And then we found a whole bunch of other older interpreters saying the same thing. And that made quite a lot of sense to everyone. But I've been begging people for 10 years now to translate properly the Revelation chapter 1 verses 4 and verse 8 and other places where the Triadic Declaration appears, so that we can get a really good accurate feel of those issues, especially with what Theodore Beza says. But most people haven't joined in, and so unfortunately it's like, oh well. Like, I know Larry Brigden was commissioned by the Trinitarian Bible Society to write an article on Revelation 16:5, but I don't think that's come to fruition. But it would have been great because he knows Latin fluently, and so Jeff Riddle knows Latin, so it would have been great to have these guys come through and just translate this for me. But oftentimes you're like, well, Google Translate. So what I do now on my website, actually that's not my website. On my website, I often put, like, so say we got Erasmus here. I try and put where I got the translation from. So, like, from KJV Today. Okay, so this has been translated from KJV Today. So just so people know where I'm getting this from. And so at times, of course, a lot of this is older. Some of this is like 10 years old, that I've put this material on there. But sometimes I'll just put in brackets, that's a Google translate. Translates as that or whatever. The other day I rechecked this one and has who is and was and first, because Prius, I actually had a picture of Google Translate translating Prius as the future form is to come. So I went back through it, and the Prius doesn't mean is to come, it means first. And so I was like, okay. And so that's something I'll have to rehash back over, but that's not in my book at all, but it's just about the Syriac. Anyway, I'm sort of digressing. So let's move on.
And then he says, so if White had done a basic cursory check of the annotations of Erasmus, he would find the reading of Erkomenos. But this is not just in the latter editions of Erasmus, but in all 5 editions. See the 1516 edition below, and he provides the 1516 edition. Okay, so the one I'm working from is the 1516, and I guess he's providing one from the 1535. The same note is in both, evidently. I think the reason he may have done the 1535 is just that there's fewer abbreviations in the Latin text. So anyway, there we have that. And then he says, in the dedication to Pope Leo X, Erasmus says that one of his purposes for the annotations is to disentangle and explain anything that may be complicated, ambiguous, or obscure, and that he included Kai or Hosius in the main text, but he expressed doubts.
Okay, so I want to go through this slowly because sometimes the reading over things could be, you don't really even know what's being said. So in the dedication to Pope Leo X, in his Novum Instrumentum Omne, Erasmus says, or said, I have added annotations of my own in order, in the first place, to show the reader what changes I have made and why. Second, to disentangle and explain anything that may be complicated, ambiguous, or obscure. So that's why. That's Erasmus's own words as to why he has the annotations.
As to the authenticity, he says, Nick claims that Erasmus clearly expressed a doubt as to the authenticity of the reading in his annotations. The annotations are like a running commentary for the full text and reveal Erasmus' aims and methods. Erasmus was always striving for a faithful text. that was understandable and correct to the Greek, annotations revealed so much more than the one-sided meaning of the text. I'm sorry, the one-sided meaning in the text. White bases his false claims, Nick says, upon half-baked reasoning of the annotations of Beza, as we shall see soon, but then also failed to do rudimentary homework and look at Erasmus' work, which was passed over in silence and not mentioned once in White's book. It is not as if the reading was buried in a cave. Even enemy of the Comma Johanneum, Isaac Newton, wrote in 1693 that Erasmus had erchomenos in his annotations and mentioned this basic fact in his notes on Revelation 16:5 hundreds of years before White had access to Google search. And he does say in notis Erasmus pro osias legit erchomenos. And there's something else here which I'll come to in a moment, which he bolded and underlined but didn't describe. And he says the underline translates as, at the notes Erasmus for osias read erchomenos. Newton left an observable paper trail for people like White to follow, but White knows very little, Nick says, about this topic and just claims Erasmus rejected the reading. In White's tirade against Luke Lubifor concerning the yellow post on this issue, White said, why should I take Theodore Beza's conjectural imitation, where he decides a reading on the basis of what he likes, and say that the mass of Christians believe this, when nobody before Theodore Beza ever had the idea that Revelation 16:5 read that way, or read that way? Why should I believe that? Note the ignorance of the readings of Jerome, Clement, Beatus, Haimo, Erasmus at all, based on what Beza likes. I mean, who would not have read Erasmus' notations in all of his editions in the Reformation? It's literally printed with the here. I don't know why. It's very much just a spoken version. Every textual scholar would have, but no, White claims nobody before Theodore Beza ever had the idea that Revelation 16:5 read that way, or ever questioned the reading of holy. How illiterate. But for those who know White's pseudo-scholarship is not surprising. So obviously I don't endorse Nick's criticisms of White. I just mentioned.
Okay, so he's not endorsing the criticisms of White, but am I correct? So this is the thing. It's like, fair enough, you're friends with the guy, and you don't want me to say anything negative about him. But I've pointed out very clearly at the beginning of this, White said there was not a question about it on anyone's part as to what the passage actually reads. So no one's questioning it. So TurretinFan's like, well, James White's just using rhetoric. Well, regardless, is he saying that it's never been questioned? So I'm like, okay, well, why then did Erasmus question it? And I just open up the can of worms and look at it and go, well, yeah, Erasmus, this, and that, and just point out. And I'm like, well, okay, so this is why you have this in the annotation. So obviously he's questioning it. And then I'm looking at, Isaac Newton mentioned this because he has here, Erasmus for Hosios read erchomenos. So he's got that written there. And so Newton's mentioning this. So it's not like it's hidden in a cave or anything. So people are questioning this. They're saying, is this reading correct, or is this other reading correct, or whatever? And they're talking about that Erasmus was mentioning, erchomenos here. And so, I said White knows very little about this topic. And I think I've clearly proven that James White doesn't know that it's a noun phrase. He doesn't know that it's related to the name of Jehovah. He doesn't know that it's a sacred, holy name is in Revelation 16:5. He might know now, but he didn't when I was writing this book. He doesn't he doesn't acknowledge the weight of things being in Beatus of Libana, etc., Haemo Halberstadensis, or in the Ethiopic. He just shrugs all that off. And so, but those things are not mentioned in his book. When he does mention the Ethiopic, he says the reading is not there. The reading of Isomenos, but clearly what is equivalent to Isomenos is there. And then this is what James White says publicly, talking about Revelation 16:5. So he's not off with the fairies. He's talking about something else. He's saying, why should I take Theodore Beza's conjectural imitation, where he decides a reading on the basis of what he likes, and say that the mass of Christians believe this, when nobody before Theodore Beza ever had the idea? So not even the idea. So no one had the idea that Revelation 16:5 read that way. Why should I believe that? And so I understand he's saying, okay, about Isomenos, but clearly when you look at the other things that James White said, he's saying no one's ever questioned this. It's always just been holy. That's it. No one's even questioned this. So Theodore Beza just comes along and just tipped the boat upside down all of a sudden. And it's like, no, there were other people questioning this and rocking the boat. There was, Beatus of Libana. There was Hamo Halberstadensis. There was the Ethiopic. There was Erasmus. And so I've written here, notice the ignorance of the readings of Jerome, Clement, Beatus, Hamo, Erasmus et al. And so we've gone through quite a lot of these. Now, whether you are in agreement about what Clement said, Beatus, Hamo, these are very clear. Who would not have read Erasmus's annotation? So in a sense, he's saying no one questioned it. And it's almost the opposite. Everyone would have gone, oh, Erasmus questioned it. Let's look into it. Let's think about it. Why did Erasmus question this? And why is it in his annotations? And so I've written, who would not have read Erasmus's annotations in all of his editions in the Reformation? So it's not like, it was in his first edition and then it was erased or whatever. It's in every edition. So he put a question mark over that reading all the way through from 1516 all the way to 1535. And I've written every scholar in the world would have. So every scholar who was involved with text criticism would have read the annotations. So everyone who was a textual scholar would have gone, Erasmus has this other reading. Why? And so everyone questioned it. With James White saying no one questioned it, and I'm like, well, everyone questioned it. Can't you see that regardless of whether it's James White, let's forget the name James White because it seems to be a personal, deal. It's like, let's just call him Bob Smith. Okay, so Bob Smith said that no one had ever questioned the reading of Erasmus. No one ever thought it read that way. What else was it? It was there was not a question about it on anyone's part as to what the passage actually reads. Not even a question. No one even questioned it. No one questioned it. Okay, the main guy of that whole era, Erasmus, questioned it. So if he's at the top of the pyramid, then everyone else underneath him, and he's at the top of the pyramid according to these guys. He's the guy who invented the Textus Receptus, and just pulled all these readings out of wherever, Latin, and out of his own mind and mistakes and whatever they come up with. And it's like, no, he questioned it. So James White, or Bob Smith, let's just call him Bob Smith, is wrong here, isn't he? Regardless of who he is, he's wrong. So I know that TurretinFan tends to go, no, he's meaning this, he's meaning that. And it's like, well, he's wrong here, And people did question it. Nobody before Theodore Beza ever had the idea that Revelation 16:5 read that way. Well, Erasmus had the idea that it read Erchomenos, which is to come. Beatus of Libana has shall be. Hamo has shall be. So I'm just saying everyone would have been thinking about this. And so, but no, White claims nobody before Theodore Beza ever had the idea that Revelation 16:5 read that way or ever questioned the reading of holy. So obviously you can see why I've put this here. And I'm saying people did question that. Erasmus questioned it. The commentaries questioned it. And so I've written how illiterate in a sense of I'm illiterate on many things. If you want to talk to me about even the in-depth intricacies of the creation evolution debate, I don't know that much about it because I sort of settled that years and years ago, and I don't feel like I really have to, become a scientist to, defend all that sort of stuff. Now, maybe one day I'll get right into it, but at the moment I'm pretty illiterate on those things. And so I couldn't debate that. I couldn't talk about it. And so when I talk about it, I have to really come up to speed with a lot of things. And all I'm saying here is James White I've pointed out where he doesn't know things multiple times in this book, and you just have to go, yeah, he didn't know that. Now, you could say, well, now he does know that. He's good on you, Nick, for educating James in these areas. Now he can deal with all the facts or whatever. But you've at least got to admit that he got these things wrong, or he is exaggerating here. It's just rhetoric and all the rest of it. But for those who know white pseudo scholarship, this is not surprising in a sense of, many other places where he talks about mistakes in the King James Bible, and he talks about the superiority of the critical text, and he'll have certain argumentation based upon the majority text and things like that, which isn't relevant to what we're talking about. And people who deal with James White's material all the time, and they're not surprised by this, that James White sort of can just make up things and become his own authority, and then start believing his own made up thoughts, and just keeps hitting the table and getting madder and madder at people who won't agree with him. That's not scholarship. True scholarship is looking at all the evidence. So obviously he didn't look at all the evidence. He did. That's what I'm pointing out here. Did James White go and do a thorough study on this, or did he just assume that Beza just made it up? And that's still what people say today. Like, say, someone like Stephen Boyce, when he's there with James White and doing a program on the TR, he'll say, well, Theodore Beza made it up in his own mind. I remember him clearly saying that. And it's like, that's coming from James White. That's not coming from your own studies of going through and looking at all this other material. I mean, you would at least say that Beza was influenced by this other material, or at least influenced by Erasmus's question mark over this. But no, it's from his own mind, and it's like, that's a wrong conclusion. He's leading other people astray who are apologists on this issue, because it's not just something that came out of his own mind. Conjectural emendation, he just, woke up, he didn't have a cup of coffee, and he just thought, I'm just going to put this reading in because it sounds good. That's what James White's taught for years and years and years about this. So I'm just pointing out that that's wrong, that there were people questioning this. It's not a huge deal. It's just, okay, James White's wrong. Yep. Is Nick wrong to say what he said here? Or, yes, if it's your good friend and you don't want, someone to point out where they're wrong, well, you might get upset. But if you didn't know this person, if we were talking about Dan Wallace, you would just say, okay, Dan Wallace got it wrong here. And that's what you got to say about James White. Okay. I'm admitting where I'm wrong on, some of the James White information. We've got to admit here where James White is wrong on some of this information.
It here is piled on. He says, remember, White's claim was just that nobody before Theodore Beza ever had the idea that Revelation 16:5 read the way that Beza said it read. And then he mentions readings of Jerome, but Jerome didn't have the idea that Revelation 16:5 read that way. And Nick admitted as much. He got upset with me for the straw man. Nick called it a straw man of saying that that's what Nick was arguing. Same thing with Haimo and Erasmus. We'll come back to Erasmus in a second. Erasmus doesn't suggest what Beza suggests. He suggests something different. So, unfortunately, I think
I'm very. See, this is what I'm. This is where I'm like getting frustrated, because clearly, I'm like, okay, let's read slowly through this. This is sort of skipped over, and then TurretinFan's like, okay, so I've got my idea of what Nick means here. Instead of just reading what I said, let's listen to this. So from the beginning, I've said, James White said there is not a question about it on anyone's part as to what the passage actually reads. So no one's ever questioned it. Now, let me ask you a question. Is that true or false? Dun dun, it's false. People did question it, didn't they? Erasmus questioned it. Okay, so that's true. So I'm right to point that out and point out where, well, sorry, James, that's wrong. Even if we look at Isaac Newton was questioning, pointing out where this was questioned by Erasmus and etc. So then we're like, okay, so Newton left an observable paper trail for people like White to follow, but White knows very little about this topic and just claims Erasmus rejected the reading. In White's tirade against Luke, now I can never pronounce his last name. I'm pretty sure it's French. Concerning the yellow post on this issue, White said, "Why should I take Theodore Beza's conjectural emendation?" So it's not a conjectural emendation. Okay. But yeah, beside the point, where he decides the reading on the basis of what he likes. But he didn't choose it according to what he likes because he had an ancient manuscript, but that's beside the point. That's something else. And says that the mass of Christians believe this when nobody before Theodore Beza ever had the idea that Revelation 16:5 read that way. So when you have Kaiho Ekomenos, it's reading that way. It's not exactly, but it's the idea that it reads in a future form, okay, that it fills a full triad. So that is the idea that it reads that way. And that's the main thing I'm pointing out. And nobody even thought, and matching it with White's comment up here, he's clearly saying that there's not a question about it on anyone's part as to what the passage actually reads. But no one's even questioning. But they are questioning it, aren't they? And then he's saying to Luke, I always call him Lou before, but I know that's wrong. And he's talking to Luke and saying, nobody before Theodore Beza ever had the idea. And I'm like, well, what about Betis and Hamo? And now he's saying, okay, well, Jerome. Now, the thing is, when you're looking at Betis of Libana, you are looking at a Latin text and a Latin commentary. And so this is, for me, pointing to a text of Jerome. Now, if you get Jerome off the shelf now, there are, people do this. I've had it. There's a guy called Jonathan Burris, and he's like, well, if I get my Latin Vulgate off the shelf and look at that, it hasn't got that reading, and it's like, but clearly Wordsworth said that at times this is translated as shall be. And so we do see that at times the Revelation 16:5 reading of Esomenos was in some of the Latin manuscripts. So, and the reason that I'm saying that TurretinFan is strawmanning is because I'm making a clear case for something here, and he's saying that I'm claiming something else. And so that's what a straw man is. It's, hey, it's a lovely day outside. Well, no, let's drive 100 kilometers in the other direction. Oh, there's clouds in the sky. It's raining. So it's not a lovely day outside, is it? It's like, no, I was meaning here now, and so that's a straw man argument. It's a completely different argument to what I'm arguing. It's making me say something that I wasn't really intending on talking about. And usually people would understand and see that. So that's what I'm saying. Clearly, James White doesn't mention Betis Flibana, doesn't mention Hamo, doesn't mention Erasmus, doesn't mention the triadic declaration, the expansion of the name of Jehovah, doesn't mention that at times this reading was found in manuscripts of Jerome, according to Wordsworth. And so let's continue.
I think Nick had gotten a little worked up on this particular section he was writing and just misspoke in a dramatically wrong way. But coming back to what does he actually say? What does our beloved Erasmus say? Erasmus is, I call him beloved here just sort of tongue-in-cheek. He is a Roman Catholic priest. He was a Roman Catholic priest. I don't agree with almost anything he has to say just because he says it, notwithstanding the fact that he is a great scholar of the time and a brilliant man and And I'm very thankful that he made the effort to get the New Testament in print, and he didn't wait and just rely on the Complutensian efforts. So let's see if we can make this a little bit bigger. See if that will do the trick. That's too big. Well, no, it fits. All right, so, oh, and I can actually make it even bigger by doing it thus, or there. There we go. All right, so section 313, Desiderius Erasmus. At page 674 of the 1516 Greek New Testament, Erasmus included annotations on Revelation, specifically those on Revelation 16 are these. These are all the notes for Revelation 16 that he had provided in the 1516 edition, which is his first edition, if I remember right. But it's certainly in this edition, maybe it's I don't know if it's the first edition. In any event, in this edition, these are the notes he provided. Now, if you fluently read Latin with all these abbreviations, good for you. Not everyone is as great at that. So I've tried to provide a transcription of the portion that's relevant. So the portion that's relevant is quies et qui eras, and then you see there's kind of this closed paren, period closed paren, and then that continues down until the end of this erkomenos, and then there's a space, and then there's the etiam, etc. So this etiam, etc. is not relevant. So I just transcribed the Greek and Latin from here, which says, and here's the translation, although the interpreter changed the person, it was still said with the same number of syllables by which above it was said, who is, who was, who is to come. The one who is, and the one who was, and the one who is coming. This is an interesting puzzle, what exactly he means by the interpreter changed the person. Is this, as proposed by Newton, is this, as proposed by Newton, actually a proposal to replace sanctus or osios with erkomenos? Or is he just saying that the same concept is being discussed here as was discussed above? I don't know. I think this is interesting and worthy of further consideration, but I think it's very far from saying that it's, of course, there's nothing here. This should be who is to come, who shall be instead of holy. In fact, the issue of holy isn't mentioned here. Instead, it seems that he's describing instead the fact that this is a short form of the longer form, which would have hoerkomenos, which doesn't suggest necessarily a substitution of the word erkomenos for hosios. But, it is what it is. So I don't know how someone else translated it the way Nick has it. Nick has it translated.
And so, as I mentioned in the introduction to the book, some of the Latin needs polishing, and so there is quite a fair bit. And a lot of what I had written in the book, that was in 2015 when I had time in Pakistan. I had like a month to do the book, and so I basically did all the guts of the book, and then when I came back, it was like a couple of years later, someone said, you should turn it into an actual book. And I was like, okay. And so I did that, part-time, and I was pretty rushed with it. And that's why there's quite a lot of typos and misspellings. But the main gist of it is there. And also, I guess one of the main reasons why I was pointing these things out was because no one, like, as far as I knew, I was finding, what's his name? Newton, sorry. I was finding quotations of Newton, talking about this. And then I'm like, okay, wow, it's in Erasmus. And see, these are places where when I'm doing a study, someone's like, okay, well, this reading's wrong at Revelation, 14:1. It should say this. And so I go, okay, let's start from the beginning. Let's go through like Valler's annotations. Let's go through some old manuscripts. Let's look at the manuscript evidence. Let's go through Erasmus's annotations. Let's look at Erasmus's 5 editions. Go through Stephanus, look for footnotes, look for marginal notes. Go through Beza. Let's check out his annotations. Let's go through some of the versions, the Dutch Statenvertaling. Is there a marginal note? Is there, and looking at commentaries and things like that. And so that's usually where I start and go through from that. and do a study on it, where what I was mainly pointing out was why it didn't even do that with one edition of Erasmus, because they all say the same thing. So that was my main point, that he didn't even go back and see what Erasmus said on it. So he had no idea what Erasmus could have said esomenos. He wouldn't have even known, because he's got his way of thinking, and he's like, well, that's it, and it's like, so it doesn't matter what we show James White after he's made a conclusion. He's just like, I've made my conclusion, that's it. And it's like, well, did you know about Erasmus? He didn't. And so he's been shown a lot of things after he's written things in his book, and he just won't budge. He's like, no, the magisterium has spoken, and that's it.
Translated in words that are very confusing. He says, although interpreter changed from, however, to harmonize with the list mentioned above, who is, who was, who is to come. I don't know. I don't know how he got there. So ultimately, we'll come back to that. So let's see. However, I thought it would be nice to know when he references above, I thought, oh, well, let's go back and check Revelation 1:4, where this topic's introduced. So maybe he has some notes there. And sure enough, he does. And you'll see here's the selection from annotations on 1:4 at page 671 of this edition. And here's the transcription in the Latin and Greek. And then here's a translation. From the one who is, who was, and who is to come. And then here's what he says. This is Erasmus. I don't endorse it. Just letting you know what he says. Honestly, it must be admitted that the Greek expression means...
So I'm not sure where TurretinFan got his translation of this. It would be great to know where exactly. Is this Brown's interpretation or Rummel, or I'm not sure where, but it would be great to know where. Perhaps I'll find that out later, or maybe I can find it out now. Let's have a look. And from the 7 spirits, moreover, comma, that. Okay, so let's look for that. So I can't see that exact interpretation in a Google search. So it mustn't be online yet. But let's just continue.
Absolutely nothing, however you read it. Then he quotes the Greek. 4, imagine the words themselves being placed as if in isolation.
Okay, so I want to go slowly through this. So I'm on 1.25. Let's just go back.
And then here's a translation. From the one who is...
So I might read through this. Now, I know TurretinFan's going to read through it, but I feel that he sort of rushes through it and also tries to put a bit of a slant on what Erasmus is saying, like he's saying something in a bit of a comical way or whatever. From the one who is, who was, and who is to come. Honestly, it must be admitted the Greek expression means absolutely nothing, however you read it. Apo to ho en kai ho. To on kai ho en kai ho ekomenos, from the one who is, and the one who was, and the one who is coming. For imagine the words themselves being placed as if in isolation. Ho ekomenos is tolerable, but what in the end does ho en or ho un signify? Word for word, it sounds like this: from being, from which was, and from he which is to come. Valor thinks that by this novelty of expression and unchangeable property in God is signified, especially where he changes the case in spirits and ke apo ton epta pneumaton. and from the seven spirits. Moreover, that erchomenos is a participle of the verb, which is ambiguous for both tenses, but in this place, futurus would have been more appropriate since the two tenses had preceded. So it's interesting. He's saying that the reading futurus, it shall be, sums up the character of God, sums up, we know it sums up the name of God. And most people mention and that's why I say it's the purest form of the triadic declaration, because it is a pure triadic declaration where is to come is an event. So he does go to Valor. I really should read Valor's 1:4. I'm pretty sure I have. In Revelation 16:5, Valor seems to think it's like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit being mentioned. These three, it's to do with the Trinity. It's like a Trinitarian type of expression, which is quite interesting. I couldn't really see that there. But anyway, so that's what Erasmus says. I'm not sure exactly where he's getting that from, but let's let TurretinFan explain this.
Is who was and who is to come. And then here's what he says. This is Erasmus. I don't endorse it. Just letting you know what he says. Honestly, it must be admitted that the Greek expression means absolutely nothing, however you read it. Then he quotes the Greek. For imagine the words themselves being placed as if in isolation. Hoekomenos is tolerable, but what in the end does hoen or hoon signify? Word for word, it sounds like this: from being, from that which was, and from he which is to come. Valla thinks, I think he's speaking of Lorenzo Valla, thinks that by this novelty of expression, an unchangeable property of God is signified, especially when he changed the case in spirits and from the seven spirits. Moreover, that erchomenos is a participle of the verb, which is ambiguous for both tenses. But in this place, futurus would have been more appropriate since two tenses had preceded.
So it's very interesting. The first triadic declaration, scholars like Erasmus are like, well, a more pure form is futurus. Et futurus s would be perfect. And it's interesting that just so happens, the futurist reading just so happens to be, I'm pretty sure it's Peter Sublai has that reading. And so it's quite interesting. So anyway.
So first of all, as far as like the portions for Nick to support, for him to go to in Erasmus, be trying to support his theories about the meaning of the text, this is the place that I would have gone if I were Nick.
I did. So I sort of had exhausted that by going through in my book when I went through the commentaries, and I didn't go through any real particular commentary. I just went through Study Light. Where am I? I went to Study Light and went, okay, well, here's like 10 commentaries. And so I just say commentaries concerning the Triadic Declaration. So I went through Adam Clark. Okay, let's go through that one and talked a lot about that. Ellicott. And so notice these are all Revelation 1:4, the first Triadic Declaration. So that seems to be the place where they're all talking about I am Jehovah, the one which was and is to come. And then the one it should read, the one who was and is it shall be. That's, how it should read. And so it's pretty much Erasmus is saying exactly the same thing as all these other guys. And the only reason I put these other guys there was because that's just what's popular. Albert Barnes, and so, yeah. So I sort of did do that, really. Anyway. So, I mean, I could have talked about all this stuff with Erasmus, but I had asked many people to translate a lot of these places in Revelation 1:4 and 1:8 in Beza and in Erasmus and in several other works, but no one really came to the plate. So I just had to, deal with what I had. And so, but that's great. I think this is really good. I'm not sure who's done this translation of it, but that would be something that I'd love to put on my website if it's not copyrightable material.
Put it onto this place and say, look, here he suggests that because of the first two tenses, futurus would be more appropriate, and then try to link it in with this reference here to having dropped two parts. But of course, the thing is, he has here acknowledges that it's hoerkomenos is what's dropped. But the problem maybe Nick was aware of this, maybe he wasn't, I don't know. It's hard to tell whether he knew about it or not. He doesn't mention it. But clearly, the idea of substituting something for hoerkomenos is not new to Beza. Because it's not new to Beza.
Which proves my point. That's all I was really saying. That people were questioning this reading.
Because Erasmus mentions it here. And this might be where somewhere deep in the head of Beza got this idea of substituting for hoerkomenos futuros.
I think everyone in that whole generation would have read Beza. I mean, Calvin was deeply influenced. Erasmus, I said Beza. Calvin was deeply influenced by Erasmus. There's books on the influence of Erasmus on Calvin and how Calvin used a lot of the methodology of Erasmus, a lot of the ways that he was learning. When you start getting to learning methodology, the trivium, etc., this type of thing was adopted by Calvin and utilized by him and taught to his disciples, I guess you call them, and one of them's Beza. So, for Beza, he would have been saturated in Erasmus's teachings from the get-go, from a very young age.
Now, futurus is Latin. How do you do that? How do you say that in Greek? Erasmus doesn't give a suggestion, but Beza can back translate into Greek. Beza knows enough Greek to do that. He knows Greek better than I do, or he did at the time. He knew it better than I do now. He knows how to back translate. There's several ways to do that. We've talked about that in previous episodes, but one of those is hohosios. Now,
one of them is Hosios. I think that he might have a speako there because futurus, et futurus s means the one which shall be. It doesn't mean holy. Maybe he's saying isomenos. I think he means isomenos there. I'll just give him the benefit of the doubt on that one.
We still haven't come to Beza's notes, and we haven't seen if he credits anybody with of doing this. And who knows if he does until we read what he says. But let's just say, if Nick wanted to make an argument that Dr. White is wrong, that someone had thought of this before Beza, as far as what we have seen so far, this is coming pretty close.
Yeah. Thanks, TurretinFan. That's all I wanted. It was just for you to go, yes. Or for him to go, oh, no, James White got this wrong. Yeah, Nick's got a point there. There were other people thinking about this. So maybe James White in a future edition could amend what he's saying. That's all I want,
The problem is, this is not at 16.5. This is at 1.4.
Yeah, but it is the first of the Triadic declarations. And so I guess it's like there are certain epochs in the Bible where you start talking about, say, Matthew 24. Okay, you will talk about, the tribulation, the period, the persecution, the future, abomination of desolation, all that. So you might have a whole bunch of stuff at Matthew 24. But then when you get to Mark 13, do you really want to rehash all that same stuff? Or you just say, most of the study Bibles we have, look back at Matthew 24 and read that, and you'll get the gist. And they might just have a few little places where there's changes. And so this, yes, it's at the first Triadic declaration, but I mean, you wouldn't expect people just to have to copy and paste it into every place for it to have that type of meaning. And it's pretty clear that these guys, when you read Revelation 4:8 and etc., they do point back to Revelation 1:4 usually. Almost all the commentaries do it. So
here's where Erasmus thinks it would be better to have, more appropriate to have futuras here as the third part, since the two tenses had preceded. So Erasmus has this idea of correcting scripture to conform to his understanding, because he thinks the Greek expression means absolutely nothing, however you read it. And Valla has this idea that an unchangeable property.
I don't think that he's saying the Greek expression means absolutely nothing. I think what he's saying there is it means that it's of really no meaning. It's just like a fanciful, you were, you are, and you will be, or you are coming. What does that mean? But then he's clearly saying, okay, the novelty that Valla was talking about was this is an unchangeable property in God. So this is not only God's character, but it's part of God's name. It's the I am, how we would explain God. Someone said, "Oh, how do you explain God? Who created God?" And you said, "Well, God always has been, He is now, and He always will be forever." And we're pretty much stating Revelation 16:5. So this whole concept is in the character of God. It's in the name of God. It's in I am, and so that's why I think he's saying, in the Greek, if you just read through the Greek, this sort of means nothing. It's like, well, and even it can seem to be abrupt, and people have said that there is a solecism here because they're not recognizing that it's nominative, where Erasmus seems to go, well, it is nominative.
Property in God is signified, but in that case, you'd have to change another aspect of the text. So it's kind of like this idea that's out there, and we're starting to track how Beza comes to his idea, but for the birth of the idea, we might have to wait for Beza, because Erasmus doesn't suggest it here. And obviously I'm going beyond what is presented in Nick's book here, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you pointed that out. And most commentators do say it's a pure form of when you got the character of God or the name of God or I am, they're usually saying the past, present, and future, it should be esomenos. And I'm pretty sure, I'll just quickly grab Theodore Beza's annotations. I'm pretty sure he makes this type of comment as well. So here we are with his 1594, which is the same as the 1598, but just this one was just the annotations. So okay, so that is 16:5. We want to go to Revelation 1:4. Maybe I can just go 1:4. Whoops, no, that didn't work. Here we go. No, I don't want to do that. Oh, maybe I do want to do that. 1:4. It's quicker. Okay, so here's a blurry old picture of the annotations. So we see he's talking about the I am, Aya, and then he's talking about Jehovah. Then he's got Oikomenos here, Oikomenos there. I'm pretty sure he mentions Esomenos. Okay. So I'm just sort of just trying to skip through this, just trying to find where he said anything like that. Anyway. So let's move on. But as far as this whole section, I'm really glad that TurretinFan has gone, oh, okay, that's interesting. Here's another aspect that Nick might want to look at. Perhaps this did influence Beza. And it's like, yeah, I really feel like, finally we're seeing where he's like, yeah, well, I guess Erasmus did say these things. Instead of like, no, it's just by Theodor Beza. That's it. You know, it's like, well, these are obviously influences. It's not exactly a somenos. That's clearly admitted. It's erchomenos. But then later on, Elia Hutter in 1599, in his Dodecaglot, the 12-language Bible, he does have the Greek there with the reading of Erasmus in it, which is quite interesting. It's like he believes it should say the one who was and is to come, at Revelation 16:5. And it's like, okay, well, that's interesting.
His annotations on Revelation 4:8 are pretty brief. They just say these are the same words about which it has already been said before. So nothing too great there. You can also get his work online. Here's the link. But let's go to the Isaac Newton material, because he mentioned Isaac Newton in what Isaac Newton wrote in 1693. Keep in mind, 1693, long after Beza. But I don't know how familiar Isaac Newton is with Beza, but Isaac Newton, yeah, is a smart guy in general, if it's the same Isaac Newton that I think it is. So he has some notes, which appear to be a manuscript document, which include various readings of Revelation, or it was originally a manuscript document. I don't know if it was ever published in his lifetime, but here's a transcription of his notes on Revelation 16:5. And you can see that he's considered some of the issues here, and you can see that there's the discussion of Erasmus's Latin, the Complutensian, Stephanus, there's kind of a collation, but it's not necessarily a collation of manuscripts, a collation of printed text mainly. But you'll notice here he comes to Kai Ho Hosias, and he has Erasmus here, but then he comes to Kai Hoen Kai Ho Esomenos, and he says, now this is the part, which was the part? Yeah. Here he says, Erasmus for Hosias has erchomenos, which is great. I mean, I don't read Erasmus that way, but if Isaac Newton does.
So I think this is a very important thing to look at, because what TurretinFan has been saying is that while some of these readings have the one who was and is to come or whatever, many times it will have wholly written after it, okay? Where here, even Isaac Newton is saying that Erasmus for Osios has erchomenos. So it's a substitution. And so that's very important, because many other places he's saying, well, Osios is not substituted, where clearly here, this is how Isaac Newton, smart guy, this is how he read the annotations of Erasmus.
Good for him. Anyway.
So TurretinFan's basically saying there, well, that's how he reads it. I don't read it like that, because he has been saying the opposite for quite a long time.
One can read for themselves. Maybe the 1535 has some additional notes that I didn't capture. I don't think so, though.
I think the 1535, all the way through from 1516 and 1535, has exactly the same notes. So I did go through all of them. I'm pretty sure I've got all of them on my website, actually. Or maybe I've just got all of them on a computer somewhere. And where let's go to Erasmus. Yeah, the 5 editions of Erasmus have that. Okay. I remember getting the 5, or actually maybe it wasn't for there, but I did look them up, because I wouldn't make the claim that all 5 editions had it unless I'd gone through the 5 editions. and looked it up. But it just seems a shame that I don't have the 5 editions all sitting there, and that's why I do what I do sometimes. Like say with the issue of Revelation 22. I'm just showing you an example of where I would do this. Oops. Okay, so Revelation 22. This is a bit of a roundabout way of getting there, but I haven't got a direct link to this article yet because there are some things in this article that are unfinished. And so I know Timothy Berg found it and started critiquing it. And I'm like, oh. So I was in the middle of doing so many other things, and I just had to quickly like tidy it all up. And because sometimes I'll start things, but it's like if it's in the public area, people critique it as if it's a finished work, where most of the work on my website is a work in progress. So I'll put a tiny bit of information there, and I'll build on it and build on it. And so what I have here is, say, the quote, first quotation by Erasmus talking about, however, at the end of this book, I found some words. They claim it's 136 words, but he just said some, and clearly said it was around the place where it says Book of Life. Some words in our versions which were lacking in the Greek copies, but we added them from the Latin. So 1519 doesn't have that, 22, 27, 35. So that's where I put those in there and have little arrows, pointing to where that doesn't exist anymore. Here, it actually starts here. 1516, I've underlined it. Then I've got here is where it should be, but it's not. Where it should be, where it should be, where it should be. So obviously he's omitted that from the last 4 editions. So usually I do that so people don't have to go back and do all the homework, because if I'm confused about it and I'm searching around for it, usually it's like, well, most other people are going to search for that. I'll save them the trouble. And then so what I'm actually doing is creating a platform that other people they don't have to spend hours and hours studying. They can go, oh, well, there you go. And then they can come to other conclusions based upon what I've done. So, and that's like with the whole thing here of Revelation 16:5. I'm glad that TurretinFan's like, okay, and he's pointing out these things here, which are like pretty much in general agreement with what I'm saying. Beza's, he has an ancient manuscript here. That goes into what Jeff Riddle's been saying. I've been saying, Jeffrey Koo's been saying, Larry Brigden, and others.
So I think it's the same, but in any event, more interesting, much more interesting is the note here about Asomenos. Here he says, of Beza, Codex Antiquus, an old codex of Beza. And this is the point where, if this is accurate, if Beza has an old codex that reads this way, it's not a conjecture in the strictest sense of the term.
Exactly. So that's the whole thing. In my book, I didn't point this out because I had formerly believed that Beza had a codex, because that's how I read it. But then I was sort of convinced by critical text guys that he didn't. And so in 2013, I actually went out of my way to show where I had believed that in a former video, I think it was. And went through all my, because one of the things is when you're doing edits on my webpage, you can go back, like I'll show you how I do it. Like say, let's just go back to Revelation 16:5 here. I can go back to history. And okay, let's show 500. I can go right back and go older 500. Okay, so 2009. So let's have a look at this. That's what I first put on there in 2009. So it looks like it's copied. Well, yeah, it's got Beza's marginal note. Okay. And then I can go through all the differences. It'll just show me exactly where there's differences. Or actually, I should go to the next difference instead of previous. And it will show you exactly what was put in there. So I started putting in other versions back in 2009 again. So it's quite interesting. I'm like, okay, well, Will Kinney, he had this Geocities that went, and now his other one, the dot webs one, went. But yeah, I don't even know who these other people were, but I was putting them on. D.A. Waite talks about it. Edward Hills, Coombs, and others. People who are critical of it. I've got a picture of Sinaiticus there. There we go. So, yeah. So, I mean, I guess this is the puppy feed of it. It ended up being a book. But if you go through all these issues, so I'll just go back to where it's got the list here. Sometimes you can see where I've put this information in. Because it will be under a specific heading. So I'm talking about Erasmus here back in 2011. Thomas Hollands, Greek. Theodore Beza's emendation with a question mark. So let's have a look at that. Yes, so Geoffrey Koo says, beside the ancient manuscript that Theodore Beza had, it ought to be noted that Beatus of Libana in the 8th century, So he talks about this ancient manuscript. So that is back, that's 2016, it says that. Okay, so I've put Geoffrey Koo there, but this other information has already been there under the commentary section. So if I was to go back and go to say, I'm pretty sure it's, well, let's just have a look, say back here. Because you got the whole thing of how it appeared. So, Beatus of Libana, Gregory of Nyssa, Theodore Beza, and then I've got Geoffrey Koo wrote, beside the ancient manuscript of Beza, I guess I'm sort of, because when I read that there, I was like, oh, Beza did have a manuscript. And I've clearly highlighted this. And so this is going way back to 2012 here. So looking at 11 years ago, I was saying that Beza had an ancient manuscript. So I've got, notice Beza said, and without doubting the genuine writing in this ancient manuscript, I faithfully restored in the good book what was certainly there. And then I've written, Geoffrey Koo wrote the following about the above words of Beza. Beside the ancient manuscript that Beza had, it ought to be noted that Beatus of Libana, and so clearly I'm saying that it had an ancient manuscript, but I don't mention that in the book because I wasn't sure. Because people were saying, no, that's not how he's reading it. After a while, I was like, perhaps he's talking about a Latin manuscript, and I was a bit confused about the methodology of Erasmus and Theodore Beza and how they were compiling the Textus Receptus. But now that I know all that stuff, it's like, yeah, clearly he had an ancient manuscript. And so we sort of come full circle with all that. So anyway, I just sort of point that out. So let me just go to the page, Revelation 16:5 now. When we go to some of these places now, and it's going to be after Erasmus, after Beza. So yeah, the ancient manuscript. So I've got that same thing written there. Piscator, he mentions that this was in an ancient manuscript. I'm pretty sure. Can't see that there. Yeah, here it has Beza ex Vetusto Codice manuscript restituit. So he restored the reading from a manuscript. So this is in 1518. This is written. So that's here. Somenos qui eris Beza ex Vetusto Codice manuscript restituit. For Kaiha Ozios, etc. So the Elzevirs, Dutch Statenvertaling, so Erasmus, Schmidius. So I'm pretty sure, yeah, he says Beza ex Vetusto bona fide manuscripto. So he's talking about from an ancient manuscript. So pretty much everyone in that whole era. Here he has, this is from Google Translate, but they were restored by Beza from an ancient manuscript of good faith. So that's in 1658. Okay, so it just starts shining through in a lot of these commentaries. And a lot of these commentaries I've had up for years and years, but I've just sort of, I guess, overlooked the fact that they all point back to, I knew they all pointed back to Beza, but that most of them pointing back to Beza and a manuscript that he had. And so Isaac Newton, Wettstein, the reading goes back to, he said it goes back to Piscator, but that's interesting because Piscator actually was contemporary with Beza, and he did a commentary after Beza, but also he did a lot of work before Beza and during Beza's ministry as well. So that's quite interesting. So here we have Beza from the old, as he says, good faithful manuscript. And so that's interesting as well. That whole thing is very interesting. So I'm seeing it everywhere now. Where and so that's why TurretinFan's sort of like, oh, I can see it in here in Isaac Newton stuff. Yeah, it's actually everywhere. Where they're talking about he had it, he got it from an ancient manuscript, which would mean it's not a conjectural imitation, which is exactly what I mentioned. After I've written the book, I could do a whole chapter on just Beza's ancient manuscript, but my main focus was on the Triadic Declaration, the name of Jehovah, the expansion of the name of Jehovah, etc., the past, present, and future concepts, and where that appeared in other places. But here, and this, my concept seemed to satisfy a lot of people with the nomen sacrum concept, but this tends to satisfy those who are from the confessional bibliology camp, like so Jeff Riddle and others. They tend to just go, well, he said he had an ancient manuscript, case closed. And I used to do that too. I used to say he had an ancient manuscript. Then I was sort of persuaded that he didn't. But now I'm like, absolutely he did. It's everywhere, so.
If he actually found a manuscript with this, and it's not a conjecture. So that's the interesting point about this. I don't know. It's the odd thing is, and let me change the view here for a second. The odd thing is, in Nick's book, you can see that this Bezae Codex Antiquus is underlined and bolded, but when he goes to do the translation, he doesn't include that in the translation. It's so strange. It was right there in his book, and it's kind of very supportive of his underlying idea that Beza did have a manuscript, but he doesn't talk about it here.
Because I wasn't thoroughly convinced that he had an ancient manuscript until after I wrote the book. Then Jeff Riddle retranslated the section in Revelation 16:5. Larry Brigden also did that from the Trinitarian Bible Society. And then I debated Stephen Boyce. He talked about a guy from the Smithsonian had translated that. And with all these fresh translations of it, I was like, he had an ancient manuscript. We all basically went, he had an ancient manuscript. Then we started reading back through all this material going, hang on, this commentator is saying he had an ancient manuscript. This other guy is saying he had an ancient manuscript. Everyone's saying he had an ancient manuscript. And so that became like the elephant in the room. It's like, we haven't seen this. I thought it was there back in 2012, as I was pointing out. Jeffrey Koo had said it was there, and kudos to him for saying that. I should have stuck with my guns and said it was there, but I went a whole different route, and I didn't want to put things in my book that I wasn't sure of, because I don't read Latin. And so then after I've written the book, I put a whole bunch of other material there. People have become interested in it. People have read the book and gone, well, what about this manuscript thing that's mentioned? And then that's all come to light after the book's been published. So that's why I do. I'm not really sure exactly why I underlined that. So let's have a quick look from Isaac Newton. And I probably mostly did that to point to James White's sort of inconsistency of, for some reason. So I've put at in notice Erasmus pro Osios legit Erkomenos. And so the underline translates at the notes of Erasmus for Osios read Erkomenos. I think this section here, I didn't translate it because this is like Google Translate. You know what I mean? I'm just like sort of just got that section, and then I'm like, okay, this Kaiho N Kaiho Esomenos Bize Codex Antiquus. I mean, it looks very obvious now. I guess I've just put that going, look, see, he's saying Beza has this root. So I guess from my perspective, I'm like, okay, Beza has this reading here, okay? Erasmus is saying this reading here, and this is pointed out by Isaac Newton, but James White didn't know this. So I'm not saying that I know everything about what Isaac Newton was saying. All that I'm saying here is what Isaac Newton was mentioning, that there were people who were claiming that it could read differently. They were questioning this reading. That's what James White was saying. People weren't questioning the reading. So that was my main point. Now, in retrospect, that's a very good place to go, he was saying there's an ancient manuscript. But I guess in a way that wasn't my main focus there. And that was something that I had believed but had dropped. So I guess in a way I was showing that and underlying that just to show where it's mentioning Beza and mentioning Erasmus, and showing that even Isaac Newton was questioning this. Erasmus was questioning this. Many people were questioning this. So before Beza, obviously, it's Erasmus, but that's one of the main reasons. And so I can understand TurretinFan going, well, why is it Nick mentioning this this manuscript of Theodore Beza here? It's clearly stating that that's what people were thinking it was saying, and I can understand that. But now it's only in retrospect that it's sort of like, yeah, well, it's obvious now. But I was just sort of, the water was right up to here with just me trying to get through this type of thing, just to show the places where people knew about this before Theodore Beza, not exactly what they were saying, in a sense. But it actually does help my case. So, and like I said, later on, I'll probably write a whole nother chapter or 2 or 3 about this issue and elaborate on a lot of these things. So let's continue.
And I don't know why he doesn't talk about it. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. He mentions that he got a lot of this stuff from someone who worked at the Library of Congress or something like that in his video.
The quotations, that Newton one was, I found that myself, but a lot of the, like, say, quotations from Clement and other places. Actually, I don't think it was Clement. It was other. Let me just grab it. Clement of Alexandria. I'm pretty sure that was already in KJV today. I think it was like Gregory of Nyssa. Oh no, that's in KJV today as well. Like this one, Priscillian of Avilia. These type of things, were given to me. I can't remember exactly which one, but the guy from the Library of Congress, he was just sending me constantly quotations, like where it had this type of thing. And so that's where I just would put that information there, put as much of a translation there as I possibly could, whether Philip Schaff had done that or whoever, and just pointed out its relevance. Obviously I'm talking about the future form there, not all the other issues. And so it was, in a way, I guess I'm like, okay, well, I've got all this stuff on Revelation 16:5. People will read through it and get the gist of what I'm saying, and hopefully they can take it even further. So if I find something that I'm not even that sure of what it's actually saying, but I know it's relative to Revelation 16:5 or I am or Jehovah, it's got the triadic reading in it, or it's got the future form in it. Let's put it there. And so, yeah, like this type of thing was very interesting. I'm pretty sure I got this from him. Then always existed, was, and exists, art, and will always exist, shall be, which is very interesting. There was some there that was talking about the 1 John 5:7. They were actually quotations that I use in 1 John 5:7, but at the same time they had the threefold triadic declaration, who art and wast and shall be here, which is quite interesting. So yeah, anyway.
He mentions that maybe the person from the Library of Congress didn't give him a full translation, or something got lost in the email. I don't know. I can't answer that question. I will. Let's see. Let me put this back for a moment to this view. Here we go. So here, there's some comments from Wordsworth, because this mention of the ancient Codex of Beza made me ask myself, well, if Newton notices that in the late 1600s, maybe other people have noticed it as well, especially scholars who are interested in the study of the scriptures. It's not like everybody forgot about the Bible after Beza until Westcott and Hort came along, or until James White came along. There's been a lot of Christian scholars between James White and Beza. So what about some of them who are looking for the same thing? So Wordsworth, who's a diligent scholar, in fact, he's quoted by Nick. He says in his comments, in no codex that I know is found O Hysomenos, the one who will be, a reading from which Beza's recension entered into the English version. And we see something kind of similar here.
And so, yeah, well, he's saying, I don't know what that manuscript is. So, but that's fine. There's plenty of manuscripts throughout time that people have used that have just gotten lost in time. Just because you don't have it in your hand then, it doesn't mean that people are being dishonest or people are lying about it or whatever.
In the 17th, so that's in 1849. going back in time another 50 years to 1790, and you see Close's notes here on the Revelation 16:5, and the Latin is here, but I'll provide the translation, which says, the suspicion of John Piscator and Beza, who thought Kaios Somenos, and the one who will be, should be read for Hosios, holy, is brought forward by Valken. This is the person with whom he's disputing. So the name of the work is this Emendations in the New Testament. It's in response to Valkenario proposition, etc. I couldn't find this original book by Valkenario or Valkenarius. I found an index for it, but I didn't find the book itself. It might, hopefully, if someone finds it, it'll be interesting to see what his argument was. But in any event, sort of for future study for people who are interested in going down that path.
So this has probably been one of my favorite videos going through with Turretin, because it doesn't seem he's fighting against this. It seems like he's actually going, yeah, well, that opens up this line of thinking, and let's look at some other people. Wow, we're going down a path which is just looking at the facts. And so to me, this is proper study, and I'm enjoying this.
So he says it's brought forth by him, and he declares that it was indeed true for the Belgian interpreters who rendered it die est under die was and die.
So that would be the Dutch Statenvertaling.
Zunzaal, who is and who was and who shall be. I apologize to Belgian speakers. Like, I suppose this is like a Low Dutch language. Maybe it's Flemish. I think it's Low Dutch of some kind. It's not the French, obviously, Belgian language. Certainly this conjecture is very easy, but I will by no means accept it against the codices. And indeed, as Grotius rightly observes, Somenos is not added here because this only means that God acts now with the men of the Roman Empire just as justly as he did formerly with the Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Antiochus. So in other words, Grotius says that the text, the interior, the evidence within the text is that the focus is not on the future here, and that the point is that God is dealing justly both now, he's dealing justly now as he has done in the past, and that there's not some contemplation in the future, which actually kind of makes sense given Revelation 16 is depending on the eschatology one subscribes to, this is quite at the end of time. So the idea of much being future left is sort of less reasonable here. But whether or not we agree with his arguments, I also noticed this reference to John Piscator, which I thought was interesting, since he's sort of roughly contemporary with Beza, as I recall. And I checked out his commentary on the New Testament, which does indeed mention this. But you'll notice that in his main text, he has the Sanctus, which is the Hosios reading. And then in his discussion, he does mention that is Futuras. But unfortunately, this commentary is published later than Beza's.
So I'm pretty sure this is 1613, Piscator. But he was helping Beza, I'm pretty sure. And writing like tracts and pamphlets and helping people. And so that's one thing. I've gone through the world catalog, looking through Piscator material, trying to find earlier stuff. And I guess, after a while that would be put up on the internet. And so that's where we just want to look at stuff that's before 1582 or even just after that, where Piscator is writing about the book of Revelation. So that would be very interesting to find out.
First edition. So it's not clear that he's somehow an independent witness from Beza. I think he's probably dependent on Beza for this reading. But it might be a fun or interesting thing to follow up on for somebody like Nick, if Nick is interested to dig deeper into that to see if Piscator has some other basis. On top of, so that's Erasmus. My responses on the point about Erasmus, obviously Erasmus doesn't say that Isomenos is the right reading, although his argument at Revelation 1:4, if Beza read that, which he probably did, is one of the things that could have made the gears in Beza's mind click that eventually led Beza to make this conjectural emendation at Revelation 16:5.
And I'm really appreciative that TurretinFan is going, yes, the crumbs of information are all there to point to that type of thing. And so I would come to that same conclusion as well, that Beza was like persuaded by argument. I think the whole of the Reformation period would have been looking at Erasmus's material there and going, well, why is he questioning that? And then there are, and the thing is too, Erasmus was deeply well read in Latin. So he most probably read Beatus of Libana, Hamer, Helvus Studensis. He probably knew of commentaries that we'd never even thought of, that we don't even know exist. And so like even Manetti and his Latin edition that's based upon Greek manuscripts, but has the it was the only other Latin text that we know was primarily based upon Greek manuscripts between Jerome and Erasmus. So it was 70 years before Erasmus. And so things like that are coming to light, and these things are being digitized and put on the internet so we can look at all the readings. And so the thing is too, sometimes even just reading the prologue of the book of Revelation, sometimes these things are mentioned. I mean, the Trade Declaration pops up 5 times according to TR, and so these things many times are mentioned. Like even Walton's Polyglot, I was going through that the other day, and it's got, I think it's like 150 pages of prologue talking about different languages, and I think there's 10 pages on the Ethiopic there. So I was going through that, trying to. One of the really good things to have on your phone is Google Lens, so you can just get a text that's in Latin, and you can just go translate, and it'll translate it on the spot. So which is helpful, because sometimes you're looking at something, you're looking for a few words, but just to be able to translate that into English can really help you, even though it might be, it's Google Translate, so it's not really 100% accurate, but it can be of help.
And I'm comfortable calling it a conjectural emendation, considering that in the 1700s, there was no such manuscript anymore that allegedly Beza had. More on that in the future. But this idea that, well, in the World War II, we lost lots of documents. We did lose lots of documents in World War II, but no, this is not. The 1790s, the 1840s, those are not times when people were looking for documents that were destroyed by World War II. They would have had those documents still available, even if they were later destroyed in World War II.
So I think... So TurretinFan's taken the snippet that I've gotten from Dan Wallace's Credo course, which is saying 1 million biblical documents were destroyed in World War II alone. And the important word there is alone, because in World War I, there were probably, maybe that amount, or even half of that amount. It was just still a lot destroyed. And then you're looking at other wars. And so you're looking at, say, the Great Fire of London. People are like, well, why isn't there a whole bunch of information about the King James Version? And you sort of have to piece it together from here and from there. It's a bit of a patchwork. But that's because they actually had a place, Guildford's Hall, I think it was called, and that had a lot of the notes of the King James translators, and so historians could look at that type of information. And that burnt to the ground in 1666. And it was like 437 acres of London burnt. And it burnt for quite a long time. And so libraries completely destroyed, filled with manuscripts, filled with old books, filled with things, destroyed by fire. How do we know which manuscripts? I mean, we know Beza actually donated Codex Beza to the Cambridge University Library. And that what if that had gotten destroyed? Would we just say, oh, that manuscript doesn't exist? And but the thing is, there are many places throughout Europe that have been destroyed by fire, and even just manuscripts just getting destroyed because they're wet. Because you think even back in Europe, trying to preserve manuscripts, how do you do that? And we understand that in Egypt, they can be preserved, but in Europe it's quite wet. It gets snowy every year. Things get sloshy, moldy, wet. These books are there moldering, sometimes covered with thick dust. There's rats, there's mice, there's wars. And so when I heard TurretinFan's sort of say, well, this wasn't World War II, it's like, well, it's more so like an example of like, okay, World War II happened and lots of manuscripts were destroyed. I mean, when we look at, say from the time of Erasmus through to today, how many wars happened in Europe, and how many, even when Henry VIII came to power, a lot of the Roman Catholic churches were kind of looted, and it was like a bit of a free-for-all, and lots of manuscripts and things got lost. And so that was a tragedy as well. So even just with a small thing like that. And so we can see that if someone was Protestant or Roman Catholic, there might be certain books and things that they don't agree with and like. And so things could go missing, things could get burnt, things could, during a big fire or a big flood or a big, cold season, or during the plague. I mean, like they would lock things down for like 2 years. I mean, when you look at, say, Shakespeare, I think it was 2 years between I think it was around 1592. He had to basically stay in the same spot for 2 years because of the plague. And it's like, that can change your whole entire world. Like things can be turned up. We just saw it with COVID. That was quite frequent in the ancient world, and sometimes whole villages just dying. And what happens to those houses and places and churches and books that are in the back cupboard that just sit there for 100 years and just turn to mush and turn to dust and turn to rat food, and you got an animal living in that cupboard after like 2 months, and it's destroyed. We just so that's the main point that I'm bringing up. It's like, well, in World War II, yes, this was destroyed, but I mean, you've got to take into consideration that the world has been, Napoleon grabbed Codex Vaticanus, and he was wanting to keep that, and he ended up sending that back to the Vatican. And we can see these manuscripts were just sometimes they were looted. Like Hitler was looting churches for these manuscripts, he wanted them. And so, I can see someone, you imagine you're going through Czechoslovakia, you go to this old church and there's a Bible there that's old, and people are paying, top dollar for these things. And you're like, well, I'll bury it in the ground and come back later, and you get shot and killed. No one knows where it is. It's gone forever in history. And it's like that type of thing has been happening especially since in Europe. I mean, the amount of wars that have been happening there. So I think TurretinFan's a little bit jumping the gun. We're just saying, we had to wait for World War II for things to go missing. I mean, you look at, say, Erasmus's text that he borrowed from Ruckman for the Book of Revelation. Now, Franz Delitzsch said that he found that text. Now, that text had 136 words missing because it had the last 6 verses gone, okay, because it just doesn't have those verses there. So then they were like, see, Erasmus lied. He actually had 136 words missing, not just a few, because he was saying it was actually homoioteiton that he spotted in Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. And then he said, well, I amended it according to the Latin, and the guys from the Aldine Press, they'll fix anything up that's amiss there because they have manuscripts of the Book of Revelation that I just don't have access to at the moment, etc. Because you couldn't just take a photo and send it. You had to get the manuscript and read it and study it. And so he was saying all this type of stuff, but then later on they found this manuscript and they're like, this is it. And I'm like, no, if you go through, even just through Wikipedia and look at the amount of I think it was the Andreas commentary on Book of Revelation. There were quite a lot of these available, and I'm sure that Reuchlin had more than one, being a manuscript collector. But that went missing from the time of Erasmus all the way through to the time of Delitzsch. And critical text people are like, yep, that went missing, and we refound it. But what if they didn't refind it? But to me, it's not actually even the right manuscript. It's the wrong manuscript. Because it goes against everything Erasmus said in his day. And even Reuchlin could have easily just gone, hey, Erasmus, you're stretching it here. You are missing the last 6 verses here, instead of just, a few words, it's talking about 1 or 2, little amendments. But, this is part of the arsenal against the Textus Receptus position, where Erasmus was a liar and he actually had to back translate a whole section of the Book of Revelation. And that opens up the whole can of worms to go, well, and this is the text that he used. You only use one manuscript. So any deviation from that text, they're like, see, he's either a bumbling fool or he's back translated from the Latin here and there and everywhere. We're committed to one thing. But then now it's like, this is just what Erasmus did. He is the back translator guy. When he thought Codex Vaticanus was like a back translation from a Latin document. And he said it's a horrible, wicked thing. He said that it was a horrible crime that he's been accused of, that he's back translating from Latin. And so he was like, why didn't he just do that with the Coming Johanneum then? Because it's not his practice. He was like, I need a Greek text with that in it. If you can find a Greek text with it in it, I'll amend it. But if not, I won't. And then documentation was given to him. He was persuaded by internal evidence as well. And so he put the Coming Johanneum in there. So it wasn't his practice just to get Latin and just to amend the Bible with Latin. But this is a critical text type of anecdote about Erasmus, which is just ridiculous. But anyway, let's just continue.
However, turning to section 314, we deal with Miles Coverdale. Miles Coverdale printed the first complete Bible containing the Old and New Testaments in English. Nick may be right about that fact. In 1535. As mentioned earlier, he has a very interesting reading of Exodus 3:14, which corresponds to Luther's German reading. God said unto Moses, I will be what I will be. And he said, thus shall ye say unto ye children of Israel, I will be has sent me unto you. Coverdale's I will be is the exact equivalent to Beza's shalt be, except that it's in the first person, whereas shalt be is a second person declaration from the angel. It's not just that Beza knew of Coverdale's edition on this. Beza and Coverdale were personally associated together, as Coverdale also worked on the Geneva Bible. Beza clearly saw this reading here, and most likely in Luther's translation, which in Exodus 3:14, the Luther Bible of 1545, and I apologize in advance, I can't pronounce German well, Früher Hoch Deutsch says, Ich werd sein, der ich sein werd, translated as, I will be who I will be. The link between I am and the shalt be reading can be clearly seen here. I don't know how clearly it's seen it is, but Exodus 3:14 is not Revelation 16:5. This is just...
So I sort of have to rehash a lot of this stuff. Okay, so we'll go to... where do I go to? Let's just go to some of these commentaries, okay? Or let's go to Beza, Theodore Beza. Well, actually, it was Revelation 1:4 that he talks about this, so I'll go there. Revelation 1:4. Here in the annotations, so Exodus 3:14, and he's talking about Moses, and he's saying, Aya Ash Aya. This means I am that I am. Okay, so he's saying it's related to this. Okay, This is. I know TurretinFan's like it's really got nothing to do with it. Blah blah blah. What I'm pointing to is because sometimes there is the underlying text, the Hebrew, the Greek, and sometimes the Latin as well. But most of the Hebrew and the Greek and how they're translated. Now you could translate into a rough type of translation, and it's not really polished or anything, but it means what it says. It's verbatim. It might be a bit wooden, but it's like, okay, that's what it means. But then other translators come along and they polish that, and they might have a certain amount of synonyms. There might be 3 or 4 different words that they can choose from that bring about a certain light. Okay, so when you have like the translation in like that Bees is talking about, the will be. So the Aya saying I will be that I will be in the future form, as we've mentioned before, and I go through in my book, I'll bring that up again. Maybe I can just type in covered out. Okay, so a notable example is Miles Coverdale. So he has I will be that what I will be. So remember I was talking about Aya, Asher, Aya, or the I am many times was translated as I will be. So this is one of the things that I'm pointing out, because this is part of the notes of Theodore Beza, because he's mentioning the Hebrew here. And so we can clearly see where it's talking about the past, the present, and the future. But when we study some of these issues, many times, like say Miles Coverdale is talking about the future, I will be what I will be. And so the I will be is equivalent to esomenos. So that's the main thing I'm pointing out there. It's equivalent to shall be or will be in the King James. And so I do talk about this Aya, Asher, Aya, that I will be what I will be. And some of the things from Victor P. Hamilton, I shall be who I shall be is seen as a legitimate translation of I am who I am. Then we go through some of the Targums, who will be, always will be, who will be, etc. So just looking at that future form of it, that's sort of why I've pointed out Coverdale. And I'm just basically stating that Miles Coverdale printed the first complete Bible containing the Old and New Testaments in English in 1535. So he did that from the text of Tyndale. He also used Tyndale's previously unpublished material, and also he used the Luther Bible. He used what would be called the Dutch Bible. And so, as mentioned earlier, he has a very interesting reading in Exodus 3:14, which corresponds to Luther's reading. So it's basically I will be, the future form of I am. And so it's the exact equivalent to shall be, which is important, because I know TurretinFan's sort of shrugging it off as, it's not important. Well, Revelation 1:4, the first triadic declaration, this is what Beza is saying. It's relative. Okay, it's related. And so that's why it's important, because that future reading of I am that I am in I will be would be in Theodore Beza's mind, and also the fact that Jehovah is the one which was and is and shall be, but they're sort of limiting the last one to is to come. that's important as well. So just as much as I've pointed out that Jehovah is related, I am is related here as well. So that would be one of those readings where it's like it's either relative to Jehovah, to I am, or to Revelation 16:5. I'm looking at how translators would gather their information. So knowing, like Theodore Beza, he was involved with, say, the French Geneva Bible, okay? And I'm not sure what actually, I might even have what the French Geneva Bible has in my book. I think I do put it there. Maybe I'll just type in French. Oops. Okay. Wrong buttons. Okay, so Theodore Beza was a world-class scholar from heading up the English Geneva Bible, Geneva French. So he was working with Coverdale. He would have known Coverdale. Okay, so Beza, the French also has Shalt Be, so that's in Hutter. So that's interesting. Okay, so the French version of Olivetan, so I'm pretty sure he was the stepfather of Stephanus. He has the eternal. Okay, so it might actually be on my website, so I'll just jump back. We'll look at French. Okay. The Arabic, which the Eterne, this was also the translation used in several French editions and links to I am, Jehovah, and is a summary of who wast, art, and shalt be. Okay, so just pointing out there that the Arabic has the eternal one, which would encompass the past, present, and future, and several French translations have it as well. Okay, here we have the French Bible of Beza. Okay, so I just have the picture there, but I don't have a section. So I've just sort of put the photo in, just going, okay, well, that's interesting. I haven't really done much with it. But let's look at this. So he has quies and qui. I think that's the end of the page there. Yeah. So quiest and qui estois and qui seras, which means was and is and shall be. I'm pretty sure that's what it means. Yeah, here. Oh, that's interesting. 1605 Bible of Beza. But it looks like it's the same as Spanish. Seras. Oh, no, it's different. Anyway, French. The reading of Erchomenos is found in the Greek text. Hutter's Hebrew and the French has qui seras instead of qui est a venir. So they rather reflect Beza's 1582 reading of Erchomenos and shall be. Okay, so that's Elias Hutter. Need to do more work on that. Okay, so here we have the French. It's interesting that Diodati did a translation of that, but he had Saint. So he did an Italian Bible. In the 1744, we see qui seras, which is interesting. Then we go back to Saint with Darby. Okay, 1555. Okay, very interesting. So, yeah, anyway, let's just continue with TurretinFan.
Background information. Nick offered that explanation. This is somehow background and relates to the I am meaning and how I am can be translated will be. That's fine. But, it's not particularly helpful for our overall debate on this topic or our consideration of the evidence. It doesn't add very much. Jamie says, as clear as German to an English speaker. My pronunciation of German is kind of a moot.
Okay, well, I'm going to go because I've already been 2 hours and 20 minutes. And so we're at the 30-minute mark. I'll just reduce this. So we're at the 30-minute mark of this video. So we'll continue on with another episode. So God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you another time.